From NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder. That big storm system moving across the country has not been very friendly to holiday travelers. Thousands of flights have been canceled or delayed. Flooding in Missouri has shut down roads, and snow-packed and icy roads in West Texas have made travel dicey. But the weather has brought out good Samaritans, such as Arnold Robledo and Orlando Sevilla. They went out to help stranded motorists around Amarillo.
There's people trying to give us money, not for money. We just did it for, like I said, for a little hug. A little hug and smile, we'll do it.
The two spoke to KFBS TV. The stormy weather has officials along the Mississippi River worried about flooding at a time when water levels are usually low. Authorities have caught up with the so-called affluenza teen. Authorities in Mexico say Ethan Couch and his mother were taken into custody last night in Puerto Vallarta. The two disappeared weeks ago. Couch was serving probation for killing 4 people in a drunken driving wreck. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail with a new message. He's urging his supporters to actually vote. NPR's Asma Khalid reports from New Hampshire.
Trump began and ended his campaign speech in New Hampshire Monday night with essentially the same message.
We have got to get out and vote. Remember that, folks.
And it came with a new sense of urgency. Experts have questioned Trump's ground game and whether he can turn his enthusiastic crowds into votes. Trump also announced that he'll be spending lots of money starting in early January. There have been reports that his campaign is planning a major TV ad blitz. But with all his focus to get out the vote, he was fuzzy on one important detail: the date of the New Hampshire primary.
It's so important that on February 8th, 9th.
The New Hampshire primary is February 9th. Asma Khalid, NPR News.
A Los Angeles area utility company is being ordered to pay the hotel bills for more than 2,000 families who've been forced from their homes because of a massive natural gas leak. Sharon McNary of member station KPCC reports the company is making slow progress towards stopping that leak.
It's taken 2 months, but Southern California Gas Company says it's finally figured out the underground coordinates of its leaking well near the Porter Ranch community in northern Los Angeles County. Deep wells like this one don't go straight down. They might veer and curve far underground. That makes it difficult to drill a new rescue well close enough to puncture and plug the leaking well nearly 8,000 feet below Earth's surface. SoCal Gas used it to create a magnetic field underground to help them detect the location of the leaking well. Despite this progress, it could still take months of drilling before the leak is plugged and families choose to return home. For NPR News, I'm Sharon McNary.
And you're listening to NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the estate of Miles Gatterman, whose bequest is a tribute to NPR's ongoing dedication to music and the arts, and the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, helping NPR advance journalistic excellence in the digital age.
Good morning. It's rainy at 47. We'll reach a high of 60 today at 6:04. I'm Jennifer Lynn, WHYY News. Governor Tom Wolf plans to make an announcement this morning about Pennsylvania's state budget. A Wolf administration spokesman would not say what the governor plans to announce. Governor Wolf is considering what to do about an appropriations bill on his desk that authorizes hundreds of millions less than what he wanted for schools and social services. He can sign it or veto it, and he can also eliminate any of the individual spending items in it. After a bipartisan budget compromise stalled last week, the Republican-controlled Senate sent the bill to the governor in an effort to get money flowing to schools and social service agencies. Last week, a Pennsylvania appellate court overturned the conviction of a Roman Catholic Church official accused of covering up the sex abuse of children by clergy. WHYY's Katie Culinary reports the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is asking the court to reconsider that decision.
In 2012, Monsignor William Lynn became the first Roman Catholic Church official in the country to be convicted for mishandling allegations of clergy sex abuse. At a press conference, District Attorney Seth Williams says his priority is making sure the landmark conviction remains in place.
If necessary, we will ask, we'll have another trial. We hope it doesn't get to that. We'd like to spare the victim having to come back to court and all the witnesses from having to testify and be re-victimized by having to share such personal stories.
A panel of Superior Court judges recently ordered a new trial for Lynn, who has served 2 years of a 6-year sentence in a prison north of Scranton. Lynn's attorney was seeking to have him released, but the district
Philadelphia are without water service after a water main break. The break occurred on an 8-inch main in the city's Eastwick neighborhood early last night. Officials say Elmwood Avenue in the area of the break has been shut down to traffic due to straight buckling. Crews are working to shore up the main and to restore service to the area. Sports, Jazz beat the 76ers 95-91, but the Sixers looked okay last night. Monday Night Football was the Broncos over the Bengals. Rain today, 47 degrees right now. It's 6:07.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Renee Montagne. Word came yesterday that a grand jury in Cleveland will not indict 2 police officers over the fatal shooting of a 12-year-old boy last year. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Timothy McGinty announced the decision, calling the shooting a, quote, perfect storm of human error, mistakes, and miscommunications. But he said officers acted reasonably based on what they knew at the time. And what he said was the death of Tamir Rice was an absolute tragedy. It was horrible, unfortunate, and regrettable, but it was not, by the law that binds us, a crime. On the line to talk about this now is reporter Nick Castell of member station WCPN. Good morning.
Good morning.
So prosecutors say they don't believe the police committed a crime. What was their reason?
Well, prosecutors say that they thought that officers reasonably believed their lives were in danger at the moment that they approached Tamir Rice in the city park. You know, Tamir had been playing with an air gun at the city park, and a 911 caller had expressed some doubts, saying the gun was probably fake. But the call taker did not pass that information on to police. Police approached Tamir in this cruiser, and an officer opened the door and shot him within a second. What prosecutors say is what the law instructs us to do is look at the situation through the eyes of the officer in the moment, rather than in 20/20 hindsight. Prosecutors said that an expert review of pretty grainy surveillance video showed, in their opinion, that Tamir was pulling an air gun out of his waistband when he was shot. This is also what officers had told the grand jury. Now, the Rice family had disagreed. They had hired an expert who said Tamir's hands were in his jacket pockets, but prosecutors disagreed with this pretty emphatically, and they said, given the circumstances, police couldn't have known that the gun was not a real firearm.
Well, what about the Rice family? How did they react to this decision?
They were very disappointed. The family has been critical of this process the whole time. Tamir Rice's mother, Maria Rice, in a statement said the prosecutor deliberately sabotaged the case. Those were her words. And the family has been especially critical of the prosecutor's decision to solicit reports from use of force experts and release those to the public before the grand jury had come down with their decision. All of those reports had said that there was no criminal wrongdoing in this case. So the family had gone out and hired their own use of force experts to review this case, and those experts said there was probable cause for charges. The family has long said prosecutors should have taken into account how quickly police approached and fired, as well as the fact that it was 4 minutes before an FBI agent arrived to deliver first aid. So the family has always been very critical of this process.
Well, what about the city? It seemed to be pretty calm in the wake of this.
It was pretty calm. There were some protests. A couple dozen people or so marched to a local police district headquarters last night. But it's also the holidays. It was a pretty rainy day and cold day in Cleveland last night. But more broadly, this case has come to symbolize in many ways the trouble that the city has had with police. The city this year agreed to a number of police reforms after the Justice Department found reason to believe police showed a pattern and practice of violating people's constitutional rights. So the city is just beginning to embark on this project, and it's certainly not the end of Cleveland's issues with policing.
And Nick, we just have a couple of seconds here, but very briefly, what happens now to the 2 officers?
Well, the city's going to review whether the officers broke any administrative policies and whether there's cause for discipline against them. And there's also a civil suit in federal court against the officers in the city.
All right, Nick, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's Nick Castell of member station WCPN in Cleveland.
Let's take a moment now to run home. To be precise, Hillary Clinton's home. It's the place where the Democratic presidential candidate grew up. Our colleague Tamara Keith traveled there as part of our series on the places the candidates call home. And this morning, we have an encore presentation of a report.
Hillary Rodham's family moved to Park Ridge, Illinois in 1950 when she was a toddler. It's a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb of Chicago. Quiet, except for all the airplanes. Ernie Ricketts grew up with Hillary Rodham.
Park Ridge is right up under O'Hare.
It is in the flight path.
is in a final approach.
Like so many families moving out of cities at that time, the Rodhams were looking for security, good schools, and space for a growing family. Rodham's childhood friends, including Betsy Ebling and Ricketts, took me to the old neighborhood.
The molehills live 2 doors down. Laurel Burns lived over there.
That house that always had that brown,
It's gone.
it's gone.
Hugh Rodham paid for his family's home outright with money he had saved as the owner of a drapery business. The house is on the corner. It's brick, 2 stories tall, under big shade trees.
And we'd walk home from school, and my house was over there, and we'd sit on the fence, and we had a lot of fun.
There were games of baseball played in the middle of the street. The sewer covers served as bases. Kids would ride off on their bikes, and no one started worrying until after dark. Think growing up in a Norman Rockwell painting. Here's how Cheryl Acton Harper describes their childhood in Park Ridge.
It was kind of like Americana. It was sort of a coming together of circumstances of parents who wanted to start a good life, and they wanted grass, and they wanted safety, and they wanted good schools, and they kind of came here and created that. And we were kind of lucky, I think, to be the right age, the right place.
No doubt there were many communities like Park Ridge in the 1950s. It was after World War II, but before Vietnam, a time of innocence in America, especially in an affluent Midwestern suburb. 6 of Rodham's old classmates agreed to meet me at the high school they all graduated from, Maine South High, and for more than an hour they sat at the school's broadcast studio, reflecting on their coming of age in Park Ridge, when anything seemed possible. Well, almost anything. Judy Price, who met Rodham freshman year, points to the student council.
There were still differences. The president was always a boy, and the secretary was always a girl.
Young Hillary Rodham tried to change that. Friends say not to make some big political feminist statement, but because she thought she could. Her good friend Betsy Ebling says Rodham ran for student council president and lost.
I was her campaign manager, so I advised her that probably. That one didn't turn out so well.
Hillary Rodham also sent a letter to NASA, hoping to become an astronaut, and got a letter back saying girls need not apply. But the fact that she even tried says something about the Park Ridge state of mind and the way Rodham was raised. Girls assumed they would go to college, and everyone was encouraged by teachers and pastors to look outside the cocoon of the suburbs, says Price.
Park Ridge helped to make us care about the world, and I think what made her extraordinary was that she realized that a whole lot earlier on than certainly I did, or anybody else I know.
After graduation, there were a lot of places Hillary Rodham called home. Wellesley College, where she shed her Republican upbringing and became a Democrat, then law school at Yale. Then it was on to Arkansas to follow Bill Clinton, who would become her husband and the state's governor, and eventually the White House. But when it came time to choose a place to put down roots, Bill and Hillary Clinton found a sheltered suburb much like Park Ridge. Chappaqua, New York, an affluent enclave an hour on commuter rail from Manhattan.
Hi, I'm Grace Bennett. I'm the publisher of Inside Chappaqua Magazine now in its 12th year.
Okay, where are we?
We are on King Street in Chappaqua, New York, suburb of Westchester County.
The striking thing about downtown Chappaqua is just how similar it is to Park Ridge. The little shops and restaurants, the straight out of another era town square feel.
It still has a little bit of that pop shop thing going on, which I think is a great thing.
And the way people describe Chappaqua today is a lot like Hillary Clinton's friends described Park Ridge of the 1950s. Virginia Shashin works at ICD Contemporary Jewelry, where the former president sometimes buys jewelry for his wife.
It's a nice low-key town. It's a small little town, and it's a fun town to be in. And we love our neighbors, and we love our town.
The Clintons live on a quiet street about a mile up the road from downtown Chappaqua. Bennett drives me up to see it in her Subaru.
This is Old House Lane.
Clinton's home is a white farmhouse near where the street dead ends at a cul-de-sac.
It's right. That's right there. Yes.
Oh, and there's a trash can that says USSS, U.S. Secret Service. She's come a long way, but as one friend put it, you can take the girl out of Park Ridge, but you can't take Park Ridge out of the girl. Back at the high school, her old friends Betsy Ebling and Mike Andrews reflect on how growing up there affected their worldview.
Those opportunities and
our kids today and our grandchildren is that you can have a breathing space.
Hillary Clinton never moved back to Park Ridge, and in the 1980s, her parents sold their house on Wisner Street. But when she talks on the campaign trail about the America she wants to build, you can hear hints of Park Ridge in the 1950s. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
So Hillary Clinton is likely to make an issue of clean energy if she wins the Democratic nomination. And that campaign will unfold in a time of rapid change in renewable energy products. We will report on changes in renewable energy in the year ahead. Today, all things considered.
And coming up shortly, a new investigation reveals health organizations have violated many individuals' medical privacy. This happened at hospitals, drugstores such as CVS, and at the government levels.
The VA's complaints were actually far more serious. There were many more employees who were looking inappropriately at the records of veterans, but also other employees at the hospital.
Medical records compromised and steps to protect them coming up at 6:23. In about 5 minutes on WHYY. Good morning. Raining pretty steadily in Philadelphia. A rainy start to the day. Clouds around late afternoon. Showers in the afternoon. High of 60.
I'm Marty Moscow. In Today Radio Times, we look back on the year in TV shows, including the changes to late night, and a good year it was. Then we continue our history series with Simon Winchester and his sprawling and fascinating history of the Pacific Ocean. That's Radio Times, today from 10 to 12 on WHYY.
NPR News in Washington. I'm Dave Mattingly. The death toll in Pakistan is up to 16 after a suicide bombing at a government office in the country's northwest. A faction of the Pakistani Taliban is claiming responsibility. Recent flooding in the north of England is prompting some political finger pointing and back and forth over how to prevent the bombing. Henry Miller is in London.
After weeks of constant flooding, local lawmakers in the north of Britain say there's growing anger. The government has not invested enough in flood defenses, accusing it of sharply cutting funds in the north but boosting them in the more affluent London and the south. Prime Minister David Cameron denies this, insisting there is no north-south divide, that money goes where it's needed.
Snow is likely today in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. Otherwise, this should be an easier day for airline passengers. More than 2,800 flights across the U.S. were canceled yesterday because of storms, mostly in Chicago. Thousands more were delayed. In Ohio,
What do we want? Justice! What do we want?
protesters in Cleveland after a grand jury decided not to indict 2 police officers in last year's fatal shooting of a 12-year-old boy. Tamir Rice was shot and killed at a local recreation center while carrying an air gun. His family wants the Justice Department to get involved. I'm Dave Mattingly, NPR News in Washington.
Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Philadelphia supports WHYY. CTCA in Philadelphia delivers comprehensive treatment for brain and spine tumors, including advanced neurosurgery, radiation, and systemic chemotherapy. CTCA's integrated approach to cancer treatment includes conventional cancer treatment combined with supportive therapies to help patients maintain their quality of life while in treatment. More at cancercenter.com.
The deadline for the 2015 tax year is December 31st at midnight. Visit WHYY.org/support to make your gift now. Thanks very much.
I second that. Thanks very much. 6:21. Let's get to the roads with Melody.
We have big problems on 476 northbound at overturned vehicle. The left lane's blocked between exit 511 and exit 9 Broomall, and we have the left lane closed because of the southbound accident. 476 northbound from 95, you're jammed there past exit 1. And 476 southbound, an accident has the left lane blocked between exit 3 Media Swarthmore and exit 1 McDade. Accident in Chester County, Route 1 northbound north of 41, slowing things down. And Waverly Road blocked because of a fallen tree between Lafayette Road and Riverview Road, and also 44 and West Deptford blocked at Paradise Road because of a fallen tree. This report brought to you by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. For WHYY, I'm Melanie Armstrong.
Lots of rain to start your day. We're going to reach a high of 60, 6:22.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations. and from Barracuda Networks, offering cloud-connected storage solutions for protecting and recovering essential business data, including emails and files, virtual servers, and databases. More information is available at barracuda.com. From the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, dedicated to the belief that investing in women and children today ensures a healthy, prosperous future for everyone. More information is available at gatesfoundation.org. And from Emily and Antoine Van Ochtman, supporting New Futures, which works to help low-income DC area youth graduate from community college or certificate programs and become financially self-sufficient. Information is available at newfuturesdc.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Renee Montagne. We all like to think our health care information is safe from prying eyes. Turns out, not so much. The investigative news organization ProPublica looked into hundreds of complaints over several years and found hospitals, pharmacies, and the VA have repeatedly violated individuals' medical privacy. Today, ProPublica releases a new online tool to track those privacy violations. ProPublica senior reporter Charles Ornstein joined us from New York. Good morning.
Hey, Renee.
Well, why don't we break this down to the kinds of privacy violations we're talking about here?
So some of these are pretty basic, like handing the wrong medical records to the wrong person. Others are deliberate, so people who are, going to snoop in the records of a family member or a friend, ex-friend, and sharing that information on social media or in other ways.
Well, you have one story in this report about a former CVS employee. Why don't you tell us about that and how much that reflects what's going on in other companies?
Sure, so I talked to an employee named Joseph Fennedy, who worked on a small team that dealt with complaints that were directed to the CVS president's office. And Fennedy's job was to figure out what happened and apologize to the consumers and promise that it wasn't going to happen again. Which then, it did happen to him personally. So he had to call into the CVS call center about a personal prescription. And a couple days later was walking past a conference room and heard a coworker telling other coworkers about his personal medical information.
And I gather even medicine might get delivered to a neighbor, and then that neighbor finds out what you're taking. I mean, this is a high level of sloppiness.
Well, Fennedy was saying that the types of complaints he got, one patient's medication was delivered to a neighbor and it revealed that he had cancer. So these are the types of complaints he dealt with, and then he experienced it himself and feels that, CVS as a major corporation doesn't pay enough attention to these privacy violations, at least from his experience.
Now that's CVS, but it is not necessarily the worst offender.
The biggest filer that we found was the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, that they had more complaints and more issues than any other health provider in the country.
And of a similar nature?
Well, some of the VA's complaints were actually far more serious. There were many, many more employees who were looking inappropriately at the records of both veterans, but also other employees at the hospital. There were some accusations of retaliation where whistleblowers at the VA who were trying to raise serious issues with patient care found themselves retaliated against. We found many instances where widows were receiving information on the wrong spouse after the veteran died.
Wow. What did they say to you when you reached out to these companies in the VA?
So CVS said that it takes privacy very seriously, which is a response that we got from every company that talked to us. The VA says the same thing, but we weren't able to get sort of very firm answers about why these things happen over and over again. Nor were we able to get really solid answers from the government about why it doesn't take action for these repeat offenses.
Is there then anything people can do to protect their own health information?
Sure, there's a few things people can do. First, people can now check our tool at ProPublica.org and look up their health organizations to see whether or not and how many violations of privacy they've been cited for. They can ask their health providers to put restrictions on who accesses their records. They can also ask for an access report. This is a report that indicates who's looked at your records. And finally, if you think your records have been looked at without your permission, you can file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, which is a small agency in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that enforces the federal patient privacy law, which is known as HIPAA, and they may investigate it.
Charles Ornstein is a senior reporter from ProPublica. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Renee.
We are about to meet an artist whose popularity peaks this time of year. backlog. DJ Earworm files away little pieces of the year's biggest songs, bass lines, guitar riffs, catchy lyrics. And since 2007, he's been taking those pieces and stitching them together to compose an annual mashup he calls United State of Pop.
I knew I needed to get the vibe that was a lot more emotional than it was, say, a few years ago. There's a lot of nostalgia going on. A lot of the dance groups, while they're still upbeat, they're kind of retro, like Blue Fight's Sugar, or The Weeknd's I Can't Feel My Face. They both have this sort of very comfortable groove that you feel like you've heard a long time ago. Big Sean, I don't F with you, F with you. He's got this sort of bell-like tone that goes over his hip-hop beat. Right, I took it out and put it over the lush orchestral Ellie Goulding background. And then the Justin Bieber sort of flute. And then there's the synthesizer from Watch Me and the Sigh from Taylor Swift's Wildest Dream. And they all come together, and I just found it really uplifting. A song that you hated to hear today, it takes you right back. It's not about whether or not you like the song, it's about how you felt about yourself in that time in your life. Every song has someone who thinks that's cool. It's not popular for no reason, and I'm really interested in what that is.
That's DJ Earworm, the creator of United State of Pop 2015. It's a mashup using the top 50 pop songs from this year.
It's a fun This Morning edition on WHYY at 6:30.
WHYY is supported by Veritable LP, a $13 billion investment firm providing integrated advice to more than 200 American families. More information is available at veritablelp.com.
Some rain in Philadelphia, 48 degrees, and it's 43 in Havertown. Good morning, I'm Jennifer Lynn, WHYY News. Ellsworth Kelly died Sunday in upstate New York. The abstract artist was 92. When the Barnes Foundation opened along the Parkway in Philadelphia, Kelly was commissioned to create new work for it. Peter Crimmins reports from the WHYY Arts and Culture Desk.
The Barnes Foundation is based on a collection of art assembled by Albert Barnes in the early 20th century, and since then it has remained steadfastly unchanged. So when the foundation moved to a new building on the Parkway a few years ago, it wanted to update itself, and so it turned to Ellsworth Kelly. He was commissioned to create a large totem sculpture for the entrance. It's one of his final commissions, and that totem is an example of Kelly's abstract geometric style. He's trying to evoke a reaction based only on simple shapes and colors. During a visit to the Barnes in 2012, he said the idea for abstraction was seeded in him while he was living in Paris after World War II.
When I was younger, living in Paris, I went to a movie and they had the shark on tropical fish. And the whole audience, when they saw the gold and purple and blue, they all went, oh, in unison. And I said, why don't I get my paintings to say that? Because the content is in the shape and what you're feeling for.
Philadelphia was also the site of Kelly's very first commission. In 1957, sculpture for a large wall was installed in the old transportation building near City Hall. That sculpture was removed in 1998, and it's now owned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I'm Peter Crimmins, WHYY News.
6:32, let's get to the road. Here's Melanie Armstrong.
Big problems on the Blue Route 476 southbound. We have an accident, has the left lane blocked. You're jammed between exit 3 Media Swarthmore and exit 1 McDade. And you're jammed on the northbound side. The left lane is closed because of the southbound accident. And farther north, the 476 northbound, we have an overturned vehicle, has the left lane blocked. You're jammed from exit 5 to exit 9 Broomall. And Waverly Road in Lower Marion blocked between Lafayette Road and Riverview Road for a fallen tree. And in West Deptford, 44 shut down at Paradise Road for down pole and wires. Support made possible by the Foundation for a Better Life. For WHYY, I'm Melanie Armstrong.
We find out why municipal bonds may be the best bet for long-term investment. That is coming up on the Marketplace Morning Report at 6:51 on WHYY's Morning Edition.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, working with others to build a culture of health, enabling all in America's diverse society to lead healthier lives, now and for generations to come, on the web at rwjf.org. And from the SCAN Foundation, working to advance a coordinated system of high-quality services for older adults that preserve dignity and independence. More information is available at thescanfoundation.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Renee Montaigne. Michelle Burris went for a drive through the rain last weekend. She was checking out her office in southwest Missouri, and the drive gave her a good look at the region's floods.
It was pouring down, raining, and we were trying to stay out of everybody's way. There was sheds floating in the water. Just south of here, about 30 miles, there's several businesses that are completely underwater. Water everywhere. That's the only way I can explain it.
Burris watched firemen float across the water in an orange boat. They saved a man stranded with his dog.
Elsewhere, strong currents carried along children's toys and even someone's RV.
Huge RV that was taken off and just flying through the water and everything, and when it hit the bridge, it broke apart. The pressure and the strength of water rushing through there and everything has just caused damage beyond what you would believe. I mean, it's unreal.
It was even more unreal for Kenny Cole, who was a junior high school custodian. Over the weekend, he stayed up late to watch the weather. Finally, he fell asleep.
I woke up 2 hours later to 2 feet of water on my stairs going up to my porch, and my porch sits up about 3 feet. So we grabbed all of our kids and grabbed our bags, put them in our vehicles, said, hey, we gotta go, it's coming.
Kenny Cole gathered his wife and 4 kids, including 3-year-old twins. They evacuated their friend's house. The next day, they got a distant glimpse of their home, at least the part that was still above water.
We went back. We could just pretty much see half of our windows and the roof of our house. I assumed for the worst and, hope for the best, and I'm assuming there's nothing in the house. And we pretty much are just trying to survive till next month. So we're, to say the least, we're struggling, man.
As if that wasn't enough, Cole reports his car was totaled in a crash. So the family is left with no home and no vehicle and nothing to do, Cole says, except roll with the punches.
Well, let's prepare to roll with the punches of a new year by learning lessons of history. In these final days of 2015, we have 3 tales of the past.
Each relates to dilemmas of the present, and that includes today's tale of refugees.
Amid fierce debate, the U.S. plans to accept 10,000 Syrian refugees. Older Americans recall when the U.S. absorbed a much larger number of refugees from war.
They fled Vietnam after the U.S.-backed forces there were defeated in 1975. Historian Erica Lee researched those refugees for her book, The Making of Asian America.
After the fall of Saigon and the end of the wars in Southeast Asia, we resettled 1.2 million refugees. Minneapolis-St. Paul, where I live, welcomed the last group of refugees as recently as 2008. So we are still seeing the effects of that war 40 years after.
I'm trying to think about what was different between the Vietnamese example and the refugee debate now. And I suppose one difference was that there must have been some national agreement that the United States had been involved in that war and that it had a duty to protect its friends.
Right. A very clear situation of these are our allies. We had just been in the country with them. We all remember those very dramatic photos of April 30th, 1975, with the lines of refugees filing outside of the embassy in Saigon, desperately trying to board the helicopters and then leaving by boat in any way that they could. I do think, though, that one of the things that we see now is what the media called compassion fatigue. By the 1980s, as the refugee crisis continued and it seemed like the numbers were not ending, the media started talking about maybe we're admitting too many refugees.
Were there social tensions because of Vietnamese refugees being spread across much of the country?
There were. So the policies really tried to placate some of the anxieties. So instead of allowing refugees to be resettled in concentrated pockets, the policies promoted a disbursement of refugees across the country. It's one of the reasons why Minnesota, which had not received very many refugees beforehand, is now the Hmong capital of the world, partly because of the will of social service organizations and churches and nonprofit organizations.
But did that strategy work?
To some degree, but one of the things that we also saw was that the refugee resettlement programs in the 1980s were happening at the same time as some economic downturns, some fatigue about the Vietnam War. It seems like Americans wanted to just forget about Vietnam, but then we had Vietnamese and Southeast Asian refugees in our schools and in our communities. Some of the children had only lived in refugee camps for extended periods of time and had little formal schooling, so there were great needs. And with the increase in spending on social services came some anti-refugee, anti-immigrant sentiment as well.
I want to ask about security, though, because we have this modern debate about Syria, and people are concerned about letting Syrians into the country, and the question is explicitly asked, what if somebody's a terrorist in there? What if somebody's an Islamist, is against the United States and sneaking in that way? Was that concern raised with the Vietnamese boat people, as they were sometimes pejoratively called, in the 1970s, that some of them might be communists?
Not communists, but over the decades, as some Southeast Asian and the Hmong community, there was an ongoing desire to overthrow the communist government and return it to a non-communist government as before the war. There was a highly publicized case where the recognized Hmong American leader, General Vang Pao, was actually arrested and charged with terrorist activities. He was later absolved of those cases, but it's always a tension in terms of any homeland ties that certain groups have, whether they're immigrants or refugees, versus how well are they integrating into the United States. So I think that the asylum cases and the policies that we have in place now are certainly after 9/11 are very finely tuned to determine those cases at the outset.
Erica Lee is the author of The Making of Asian America. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And tomorrow we'll hear another lesson of history that informs our struggles today. It's the story of a president straining to manage a long-running threat to the United States. It's Morning Edition from NPR News.
It's Morning Edition on WHYY at 6:41. Coming up, Kevin McCory reports on a substitute teacher uproar in some Philly public schools. That's coming up at 6:45.
The deadline for the 2015 tax year is December 31st at midnight. Visit whyy.org/support to make your gift now. Thanks very much.
Hi, this is Ari Shapiro from All Things Considered, and you are about to discover my secret identity. When I'm not reporting for NPR, I tour and record with a band called Pink Martini. For the holidays, I will be both host and performer in a concert called Pink Martini, Joy to the World, a multicultural holiday spectacular. Coming here from NPR Music.
Thursday night at 8 on WHYY.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. A group once affiliated with the Taliban is claiming responsibility for today's suicide bombing outside a government office in Pakistan's northwest. At least 16 people have been killed and dozens wounded. Some reports put those numbers higher. Prosecutors in Turkey are investigating the head of a pro-Kurdish opposition party. This after he endorsed the creation of an autonomous area in the largely Kurdish southeast. NPR's Peter Kenyon says Turkey's president is denouncing it.
Prosecutors in Ankara are investigating pro-Kurdish party head Selahattin Demirtas after he said Kurds would decide whether to live, quote, under one man's tyranny or in autonomy. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called the comments a provocation and treasonous. The army resumed fighting against Kurdish militants this summer after a 2.5-year peace process broke down.
They're expecting snow today in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. Meteorologist Dave Roth with the National Weather Service says snow could be heavy in some areas.
Total amount close to a foot near the lower and upper peninsulas join in Michigan, and possibly up to 18 inches across northwest Maine.
Yesterday, more than 2,800 airline flights were canceled across the U.S. because of storms, mostly in Chicago. New numbers on the U.S. economy are due out this morning, including ones on home prices. I'm Dave Mattingly in Washington.
On the next Fresh Air, we continue our series featuring some of our favorite interviews of the year. The Ta-Nehisi Coates, his book Between the World and Me, won this year's National Book Award for Nonfiction. It's written in the form of a letter to his teenage son about the dangers faced by young black men. Also, we hear from Mary Carr. Her latest book is about writing and reading memoirs. Join us this afternoon at 3 and again tonight at 7 on WHYY.
Rain this morning. Let's check the roads at 6:44. Here's Melanie.
Good morning, Jennifer. We have bad problems on 476 southbound. We have an accident, has the left lane blocked or jammed from exit 5 to exit 1. And northbound, the lane restrictions have been lifted because of the southbound accident, but you're still jammed from 95 to past exit 1. 476 northbound farther up, there's an overturned vehicle. It has the left lane blocked between exit 5 and exit 9 Broomall. You're jammed there. Waverly Road blocked because of a fallen tree between Lafayette Road and Riverview Road. And 44 in West Deptford blocked because of fallen power cables at Paradise Road. We also have an accident, has the shoulder blocked in the New Jersey Turnpike, southbound south of the Turnpike. No delays there. This report made possible by the WesternUnion.com's mobile app. For WHYY, I'm Melanie Armstrong.
Thanks, Melanie. The Keystone Crossroads Project continues the conversation about urgent challenges facing Pennsylvania cities with Locked Out. It's a special look at our statewide housing problem. Visit keystonecrossroads.org/housing for more information.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from the Cy Sims Foundation. Since 1985, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts towards a better life. More information is available at cysimsfoundation.org. From the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, dedicated to the belief that investing in women and children today ensures a healthy, prosperous future for everyone. More information is available at gatesfoundation.org. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
You're listening to Morning Edition on WHYY. It's 6:45. I'm Jennifer Lynn. Good morning. Last summer, the Philadelphia School District took a chance in an effort to boost the number of substitute teachers willing to come to its schools. It decided to outsource the service to a private firm. WHYY's Kevin McCory reports through the first 4 months of classes, that decision has caused an uproar at many schools across the city.
Math and science teacher Kristen Combs has spent months wrestling with herself about taking any time away from work.
I'm like having such intense guilt about ever being out of school that I have this doctor's appointment that I've been supposed to be having for months that I've been putting off and putting off and putting off.
Combs finally decided to make the appointment recently, scheduled for the day after we talked.
And I feel horrible about it, and I feel like I'm completely letting my kids down, and That's insane. It's insane that I feel that much guilt about going to a doctor's appointment that I need to go to.
Combs' guilt is rooted in the fact that she knows it's extremely unlikely that a substitute will come to cover for her. All year, only 6 subs total have come to Penn Treaty, which is a grades 6 through 12 neighborhood school in Fishtown. That's meant that pretty much every day, the remaining teachers have to use their prep periods to stand in for vacancies.
And so that means that we're basically all covering all the time.
Last school year, on average, for every 100 teachers who called out, the district could only find 64 to fill in. It was that far from stellar number that pushed district leaders to ink a $34 million cost-neutral 2-year deal with the Cherry Hill-based firm Source for Teachers. The private firm promised a 75% fill rate by day 1 and 90% by the new year. But through the first few weeks of school, the fill rate hovered in the teens. Recently, it's peaked in the high 30s, but even that figure masks the paltry fill rates at many individual city schools deemed unattractive by would-be subs.
They didn't look at a provider that was working in comparable districts. They looked at a provider that was working in small suburban districts, and providing substitutes to small suburban districts is just not the same.
Compounding the problem is that it's proved just as difficult for Source for Teachers to fill long-term vacancies. At Penn Treaty, there's been as many as 4 unfilled long-term positions at the same time. Add a daily absence or 2 on top of that, and real questions are raised about the school's ability to teach the curriculum. Yomari Kiefer is a special education teacher who's been forced to also take on teaching junior and senior level English courses because of ongoing long-term vacancies.
I'm in an area that I'm not certified in teaching, creating lessons so the kids are getting something. So it's been very hectic.
Each day after work, Kiefer struggles to keep up with her special education caseload while trying to teach herself the content of the next day's English lessons. No small feat for a mom of 2 children under the age of 2.
It's hard, and I know it's impacted them because I'm not there as much. And then when I am there, I'm physically there, but I'm not really there with them.
As we talked, Kiefer looked exhausted, with tears often welling in her eyes. She said students have commented on how worn down she looks, and she pined a little for her previous job in sales.
It's never ending, the amount of time that it consumes in my life. And I just want a job sometimes that I could just leave at the job and just go home and be me. So there are days when I'm like, do I really want to be here anymore? Is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? But obviously, I do because I come back.
District officials have expressed displeasure with Source for Teachers' performance, but Superintendent William Height says it will be a step backward to cancel the contract and revert back to the old method, which employed subs at higher pay with union protections. Height did say, though, that the district would take back responsibility for long-term subs. He also pointed out that it's the private firm, not the district, which is on the hook to pay teachers extra to cover vacancies during their prep periods. At a November School Reform Commission meeting, Source for Teachers CEO Kenley Davenport said he's confident in the firm's long-term success.
I want to publicly acknowledge that Source for Teachers has underperformed. We have got to do better, and we will do better.
But meanwhile, teachers like Kiefer say they worry most about the toll that the privatization bid has taken on students.
I was talking to them and I said, you guys need to really apply yourself a little bit more. And they say, why? Nobody else cares. So why should we care? And that really stuck with me. And they're right. They see it as nobody wants to be here for them.
For WHYY News, I'm Kevin McCory.
It's 6:50. This is Morning Edition.
I'm Rhonda Hamilton with Toast of the Nation from WBGO and NPR Music. Tune in for Anat Cohen in Boston, Wycliffe Gordon at Newport, Wynton Marsalis in New York, Clark Terry in Chicago, and Diane Reeves in San Francisco. We'll also hear a set from the funk band Snarky Puppy. Come to the party. I hope you'll join us for Toast of the Nation, New Year's Eve, right here on this station.
Thursday night beginning at 9 on WHYY.
Whether it's Obamacare or from the employer's benefit package, a lot of people struggle with understanding the ins and outs of their health insurance.
Just the volume of information, there's a lot to know. The other is because the language is unfamiliar to them and they don't really understand health insurance concepts.
We get a basic lesson on health insurance coming up at 7:13 next hour as WHYY's Morning Edition continues.
First, the anecdotal evidence about the holiday shopping season. Now, some actual numbers.
Marketplace Morning Report is produced in association with the University of Southern California.
From APM in New York, I'm David Brancaccio. We have some early readouts on how retailers fared this holiday season. A report from MasterCard's Spending Plus says sales from just after Thanksgiving to Christmas Eve were up 7.9% from last year. Marketplace's Kimberly Adams joins me now live with more. Morning, Kimberly.
Morning, David.
What drove the increase in sales this year?
Apparently, the fashionistas' women's clothing sales really helped drive this spike, according to MasterCard, as well as furniture sales. Things like couches and, chairs. MasterCard says people seemed willing and able to spend on big-ticket items, maybe finally transferring some of those savings on gas prices, which we hadn't seen up until now.
Look, honey, a new recliner. Now, a lot of retailers and analysts were worried about a more sluggish holiday shopping season. Has this banished those concerns?
Not necessarily. These numbers just cover between Black Friday and Christmas Eve, not the entire season. Previous estimates from the National Retail Federation said that overall sales in November and December would probably only go up about 3.7%. And the weekend before Christmas saw really sluggish retail sales, which is what worried people in the first place.
Now, we reported yesterday here about all the logistics of the holiday returns, and there's news that retailers are going to be on the lookout for fraud this year.
Right. Fraudulent returns are expected to cost retailers more than $2 billion overall this year. And obviously some of that's going to come from these holiday returns. So some retailers like Sears and Costco are being stricter about returns, trying to hang on to some of those holiday gains.
That's Marketplace's Kimberly Adams in Washington. Thank you. Let's do the numbers. The 100-share index in London coming off an extended Christmas break, up 0.3% now. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are up on the 0.4% range. The 10-year Treasury yield is up at 2.24%. How much are we buying from over there versus how much we're selling to them? This morning, we'll get a preliminary look at America's trade balance that helps us understand where the jobs and the wealth is flowing, to what extent we're doing the work in the economy, or are we doing the consuming. As Marketplace's Annie Baxter reports, a strong dollar is making American products more expensive abroad.
To some Americans, a strong dollar may sound like a good thing.
Imported goods are cheaper, and you can afford to take a vacation in Europe, for example.
Barry Bosworth is an economist at the Brookings Institution. He says we Americans have been importing more than we export for decades. But the strong dollar is deepening that dynamic, and that's not great for American firms that sell their wares abroad.
Because the goods you produce are more difficult to sell overseas.
Bosworth says that trickles down to American workers who could lose their jobs if demand slackens for the products they make. Patrick Newport is an economist at IHS Global Insight. He expects the dollar's value will start to drop next year, but he says that will take a long time to flush through the economy and show up in the trade balance.
So what we're expecting over the next 2 or 3 years is for exports to grow very slowly and for imports to grow faster than they have in recent times.
And that, he says, will be a drag on the economy. I'm Annie Baxter for Marketplace.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org.
Congress has made some of the biggest alterations yet to what the health care reform law was intended to do. One was a delay in a tax that tended to be more popular among healthcare economists than perhaps the tax-paying public. The so-called Cadillac tax penalizes employers that offer comparatively expensive insurance coverage. This Cadillac tax was supposed to take effect in 2018, but now that's delayed until at least 2020. One of the architects of the health law says that might not be as big of a loss as some people are saying. As the year wraps up, we're hearing from our reporters on the beat. Today, Marketplace's Dan Gorenstein from our health desk at WHYY. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, David.
So the world goes on even without this Cadillac tax?
There are certainly a lot of economists out there who are very clear that Cadillac tax is heads and shoulders the best incentive to control healthcare spending. That's because it taxes the kind of generous insurance plans that leave consumers with few copays or deductibles and can encourage lots of potentially wasteful spending. But Harvard economist David Cutler, the architect you just mentioned, says there's a drawback, and the drawback is that it's a crude tool.
The biggest difficulty is that people don't always cut back on exactly the right things.
Cutler says, look, when costs go up, most consumers are going to cut back by 10 to 15%. But that could also include preventative care, things that could be good to get now that could stave off really big ticket expensive items down the road, David.
Well, that's the problem there. But if the tax goes away permanently, the suggestion now is just delayed a couple years. But if it goes away altogether, where does that leave us? Are there other ways to control spending?
Cutler would argue that the Cadillac tax and other changes have already had some kind of impact. The Kaiser Family Foundation points out that high deductible policies have gone from 4% in 2006 to 25% today. And Cutler says he doesn't see that genie going back in the bottle anytime soon. So this higher out-of-pocket exposure is already having some of this downward pressure on spending.
Now, as you look ahead, what happens if this idea of a tax on the fancy plans is really taken off the table?
The Cadillac tax wasn't the only method they had in the law. They also had an idea where you'd create incentives for doctors and hospitals to try to figure out different ways to pay them. Sometimes people will talk about accountable care organizations or bundled payments. These are sort of different ways to pay people to get them to do less wasteful, more precise care. The problem is we don't really know exactly what the right mix of incentives is. So this is the kind of thing that's going to take time, and it's probably going to take a lot of money to figure it out right.
All right, Marketplace's Dan Gorenstein from the Health Desk. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you may think the following is just a minor hassle until you go through it yourself. You go to the health insurance company online to see which doctors are part of the plan, and then telephone call after telephone call, you find out the doctor is not on the plan anymore. This can suck up days. Well, starting in the new year, meaning starting at the end of this week, the federal government can start fining insurance companies up to $25,000 per customer if they don't keep the directories up to date. This applies to Medicare doctors, but state regulators might also be interested in widening the scope of penalties for health provider directories that don't match up to reality. Our producers are Justin Ho, Katie Long, and Beatty Jong. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. APM, American Public Media.
Get more interesting. Listen to WHYY-FM, Philadelphia, WNJN-FM 89.7, Atlantic City, WNJZ 90.3, Cape May Courthouse, WNJB-FM 89.3, Bridgeton, WNJM 89.9, Manahawkin, and WNJS-FM 88.1, Berlin.
A rainy morning with Morning Edition on WHYY at 6:59. Maybe you're dodging the puddles this morning. Maybe you're jumping straight in. Either way, here's traffic with Melanie.
Well, the rain is causing problems. We have flooding on Conshohocken Road between Diamond Avenue and Ernest Station Road, and it is closed. And Waverly Road blocked because of a fallen tree between Lafayette Road and Riverview Road. You're jammed on 476 northbound. An overturned vehicle has the left lane blocked. You're jammed between exit 5 and exit 9 Broomall. And southbound, you're jammed from exit 5 to exit 1. An accident cleared there, but you're still jammed. This report made possible by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. For WHYY, I'm Melanie Armstrong.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning. It's 7 o'clock.
Good morning. 7 months after ISIS took control of the Iraqi city of Ramadi, Iraqi forces have taken it back. We'll ask how much progress the U.S. and Iraq are really making on Morning Edition from NPR News.
Philadelphia's district attorney's office asks for reconsideration of a decision to overturn the conviction of Monsignor William Lynn in the clergy sex abuse scandal. Details coming up.
More Cubans have arrived in the U.S. this year than in the past 20. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Renee Montagne. This hour, we visit one Cuban migrant settling in Miami and hear from a meteorologist on weird weather, a blizzard in Texas, and tank top temperatures on the East Coast. Here in California, the new year brings a new law allowing for a temporary gun violence restraining order against someone thought to be dangerous. It's Tuesday, December 29th, 125 years ago today. Scores of Sioux Indians were massacred at Wounded Knee. News is next.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder. In Cleveland, protesters gathering in the rain outside the recreation center where Tamir Rice was fatally shot. Rice was the 12-year-old black boy police encountered with what turned out to be an air gun. A grand jury voted not to indict 2 Cleveland officers in Rice's shooting. Attorneys for the Rice family are condemning the decision, but are joining city officials in urging protesters to remain peaceful. More demonstrations are expected today. Moving to Chicago, an arraignment is scheduled this morning for a white police officer charged in the shooting death of a black teenager. Officer Jason Van Dyke faces 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of official misconduct. Dashcam video of the shooting released last month sparked days of demonstrations, the resignation of the city's police superintendent, and a federal civil rights investigation into the Chicago Police Department. Amid heightened concerns, airport security is tightening for airport and airline employees, as NPR's Yusun Chen reports.
The Transportation Security Administration will increase random screenings of airport and airline employees who hold badges that allow them to bypass security checkpoints. The decision follows multiple incidents in which workers misuse these security privileges. In December 2014, 5 airline employees were charged with smuggling more than $400,000 in cash through Boston's Logan Airport. That same year, a Delta employee was charged with delivering guns to a smuggler using a security clearance. TSA spokesman Bruce Anderson did not say how frequent the additional checks would become. He noted that the Department of Homeland Security says that since April, it has stepped up random screenings of airport personnel. Yusun Shin, NPR News, Washington.
The storm system that triggered deadly tornadoes in Texas and flooding in the Midwest is pushing north today. Forecasters say it's bringing snow and ice from Iowa to Massachusetts. Yesterday's weather stranded tens of thousands of air travelers during one of the busiest travel periods of the year. In Arkansas, a 31-year-old man is drowned in storm-related flooding. Jacob Kaufman is with member station KUAR and has more on the devastation there.
The damage from tornadoes and flooding that began this weekend is still being measured, with the governor issuing disaster declarations for more than a dozen counties. Whitney Green with the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management says floodwaters inundating the state are preventing an immediate assessment of damages.
Later this week, we may be sending out some teams to assess the damage. This storm really did affect the entire region, which is really unprecedented, especially in December.
2 EF1 tornadoes are confirmed to have touched down in Arkansas this weekend. Parts of the state got over 10 inches of rain. For NPR News, I'm Jacob Kaufman in Little Rock.
Police in Pakistan trying to determine whether today's bombing at a government office was carried out by a suicide bomber. Officials say the bombing left at least 21 people dead and at least 45 wounded. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Skoll Foundation, supporting innovative solutions to the world's most pressing problems with the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. More information is available at skoll.org.
Raining and 50 degrees, going up to 60. This is Morning Edition at 7:04. I'm Jennifer Lynn, WHYY News. This morning, Governor Wolf plans to reveal his response to a GOP House-approved spending plan. Wolf vetoed a similar plan in June. He could opt to sign it or veto the plan, or he could allow it to become law without his signature. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is asking a state appellate court to reconsider its decision to overturn the conviction of a Roman Catholic priest and order a new trial. In 2012, Monsignor William Lynn became the first Catholic Church official in the country to be convicted of mishandling allegations of clergy sex abuse of children. District Attorney Seth Williams says if his request for a re-argument of the case is not granted, his office will take the case to the state Supreme Court.
Our number one concern is to ensure that the conviction remains in place, that he remains in custody. But if necessary, we will ask and we will have another trial.
Lynn has served 2 years of a 6-year sentence. His attorney was seeking to have him released before his new trial, but the district attorney's latest legal move is putting that process on hold. A report shows racial disparities among suspects arrested for low-level crimes in 4 cities in New Jersey, including Millville in Cumberland County. WHYY's Joe Hernandez has more.
The findings from the American Civil Liberties Union in New Jersey were stark. Between 2003 and 2012, blacks were 6 times more likely than whites to be arrested on charges of several low-level crimes, such as loitering and marijuana possession. Cumberland County Freeholder Director Joe Durella says the findings are surprising and the county will use them to improve policing strategies.
We have high poverty, we have a crime issue. We are on a lot of the wrong lists, but the one list that this county is the top of is that we identify our problems, we don't run away from them, and we really come together to try to find a consensus on how we can solve and overcome those challenges.
The Cumberland County prosecutor also says her office will look into the ACLU's report. The 3 other cities studied, New Brunswick, Elizabeth, and Jersey City, also saw blacks and Latinos arrested at mostly higher rates than whites for low-level crimes. From the New Jersey desk, I'm Joe Hernandez, WHYY News.
Rutgers University says its computer networks are back online after its latest hacking incident. The school's security has been breached 6 times in the past 14 months, apparently the work of a single hacker. Drexel professor and cybersecurity expert Robert DeVidio says higher education is a common target for cyber attacks, with schools facing a huge security challenge.
They're certainly not unique. I don't think we should walk away saying, Rutgers is inept in terms of its running of its network and infrastructure and the security around that infrastructure.
The attacks don't appear to involve student data or financial records and are instead designed to take down servers. Jazz beat the 76ers last night, 95-91. We get rain early today, then clouds and a chance of showers in the afternoon, a high of 60. It's 7:07. This is WHYY.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montaigne.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Let's assess just how much territory has been taken back from ISIS. U.S. and Iraqi forces have celebrated advances this week. They say they've cleared out much of the Iraqi city of Ramadi. That's one of the major towns that the extremist group seized earlier this year. The news comes at the end of a year of fierce fighting. NPR's Alice Fordham has covered the story 4 years, and she's on the line from Beirut. Alice, what have the U.S. and Iraq gained?
In the main area of ISIS's control this year, which is to say the parts of Iraq and Syria that they call their caliphate, they have definitely lost some towns and some smaller cities, mainly on the edges of their territory. So earlier in the year, if you remember, we saw the fight to push them out of the Syrian town of Kobani, where Syrian Kurdish fighters worked with the US-led coalition in a huge battle that left many ISIS fighters dead, although it did largely destroy the town. And those Kurdish fighters are still pushing into ISIS turf with American support. And then over the border in Iraq, in addition to Ramadi, which we do have to remember ISIS only took in May this year, the extremists have been pushed out of several cities, Tikrit, Sinjar, Beji, sometimes by security forces, sometimes by an array of various ethnic or religious militias. And there's been other actions by the coalition that have affected them. More aggressive airstrikes on oil infrastructure, tightening of borders, squeezing of finances in various different ways.
Has this really affected the group's power?
To answer that question, I think it's helpful to look a little bit beyond Iraq and Syria. Much of their work this year has extended beyond the borders of what they call their caliphate. They have taken advantage of the chaos in Yemen and Iraq to build up franchises there. They have taken responsibility for attacks to include the bombing of the plane in Egypt, killing mainly Russian tourists, and of course the attacks in Paris. You can look at the loss of territory in Syria and Iraq as potentially limiting the group's ability to look strong, to appeal to people, to recruit franchises and individuals to do these attacks. But that's actually something that's very difficult to measure, and they're still churning out propaganda. The leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, released an audio recording just this weekend.
But at the same time, there is the question of whether they can continue to hold what they have. Is there any sense as to whether there's momentum in one direction or another here?
Well, the Iraqi security forces are certainly very keen to say that they now plan, having taken Ramadi, to move into the cities of Fallujah and Mosul, which are ISIS strongholds. There are other military sources that say this might be a bit unrealistic, based on the fact that Fallujah and Mosul are heavily populated, unlike Ramadi and Tikrit and Sinjar, which were largely depopulated by the time the battles happened there. And honestly, on the basis of the still quite limited capacities of the Iraqi security forces, ISIS have been in these cities for a year and a half, 2 years now. They're deeply entrenched. Analysts have also for a long time said that the problem of ISIS in Iraq and Syria won't be resolved until there's strong central governments in those places who can offer the people living under ISIS a better life than what they currently have. And right now that's still, on balance, not really the case.
Oh, meaning that even if you were to formally retake territory, you might still have chaos there, you might still have unrest, you might still have armed groups.
And a roiling insurgency, no doubt.
Alice, thanks very much, as always.
Thanks for having me.
That's NPR's Alice Fordham.
And we're tracking an effort in this country to prevent the next mass shooting. It's a much-debated law that takes effect in the new year here in California. Capitol Public Radio's Ben Adler reports on how it works.
Santa Barbara, California, May 2014. A young man killed 6 people and injured 13 after his parents had warned law enforcement he could be dangerous.
All members vote who desire to vote.
Within months, California lawmakers took this vote.
Votes ayes 47, noes 25. The measure passes.
And the bill was soon signed into law. Modeled on domestic violence restraining order laws, the measure allows family members or law enforcement to seek a temporary gun violence restraining order against someone they believe could be dangerous.
It establishes a process to obtain a legal court order to temporarily reduce those potential acts when we have the warning signs or indications that the person may be at risk for violence.
Rudy Escalante is the police chief of Capitola, California, and is active in the state's Police Chiefs Association. Even though there's no evidence the San Bernardino shooter's family raised concerns about them, the law is now getting more attention.
If those circumstances existed in the San Bernardino case, then it is possible, if the law was operative, that they could have reported that and been able to go through a civil process of getting a restraining order and had those guns removed.
Though Escalante quickly added,
a lot of ifs there.
President Obama has called on Americans to speak up if they believe people in their family or community could be dangerous. Democratic State Assemblyman Phil Ting wants to expand California's law to include coworkers and perhaps other groups.
You have a number of innocent victims who were co-workers of this individual who hopefully, if they had the tools to protect themselves, they would have been able to.
We have a great concern about expanding that model because it opens it up to any sort of a frivolous attack on an individual.
Sam Paredes of Gun Owners of California opposed the original law as unconstitutional. He's even more worried about expanding it.
There's going to have to be some very close scrutiny to see if it's being taken advantage of by people with a gripe or a concern or a grudge. It will always be suspect whenever used.
Gun control advocacy groups say Connecticut and Indiana have similar laws, though only law enforcement and not family members can seek gun violence restraining orders. Several other states, including New York and Washington, are considering their own legislation. For NPR News, I'm Ben Adler in Sacramento.
Here's one thing that will not immediately change in the new year. Many people will still have trouble understanding their complicated health insurance plans. Mark Zadeklik of Minnesota Public Radio reports on a shortage of insurance literacy.
Solicit opinions about health insurance, and you're almost guaranteed to find consensus. It's mystifying and irritating.
A lot of the buzzwords are intended to just complicate the whole thing and make it more expensive.
That's 46-year-old David Turgeon sitting in a food court in Minneapolis. Over in St. Paul, outside a grocery store, 50-year-old Sian Thomas, a real estate broker, says she's pretty health insurance savvy. Her family members are covered under 3 different plans.
So I had to compare co-pays, I had to compare out-of-pockets, deductibles.
So how about a quiz? I have a scenario for you.
Okay.
A guy goes to the doctor to get a wart removed. The bill is $530. How much is he on the hook for?
He has a copay of $30. He has a deductible of $100, and he has coinsurance of 20%.
Well, his deductible has to be maxed out first.
Thomas nails the copay and deductible, but then runs aground.
But I don't know what you mean by the term co-insurance.
Co-insurance, if your plan has it, kicks in after you've met your deductible and requires you to pay a set percentage of medical bills. American Institutes for Research came up with that quiz and put the question to several hundred people. Only 1 in 5 got it right. Catherine Paez researches health insurance literacy for the organization.
People really struggle with understanding health insurance for a variety of reasons. One is just the volume of information. There's a lot to know. The other is because the language is unfamiliar to them.
And that unfamiliarity, Paez says, is greater among African Americans, Hispanics, and people with low incomes and low levels of education. Your health insurance premium is the amount you pay every month, regardless of whether you seek care. A copayment is a fixed amount you pay every time you go to the clinic. A deductible is how much you have to pay before certain benefits kick in. the maximum out-of-pocket cost is the absolute most you would ever have to pay for care in a year. By the way, all of this so-called cost sharing could change if you go out of network.
We've created a monster, and it's not surprising to me that there's literacy issues.
That's University of Minnesota School of Public Health professor Kathleen Call. She worries confusion surrounding health insurance could keep people away from the doctor.
People are treating it more like car insurance. You don't use it until something happens. And that's not the way we want health insurance to be used.
Call says avoiding care could threaten public health. She also says not understanding what's covered and what's not can leave people on the hook for big medical bills.
That can mean the difference between, paying that medical bill or paying rent.
Remember that quiz? We ran it by the industry group that represents health insurance companies. Claire Cruising is the spokesperson for America's health insurance plans.
I totally understand why this is confusing and can be challenging, but the deductible itself...
Cruising mentioned that she did not have a calculator in front of her and blamed the $100 deductible for tripping her up.
I just don't know of anyone that would have a $100 deductible.
So who's to blame for all the confusion? Cruising says the industry is using increasingly complicated cost-sharing schemes to hold down the cost of monthly premiums. She also says plans are trying harder than ever to help consumers understand their policies.
Whether it's on mobile apps, whether it's on email reminders, whether it's videos, health plans are doing all of that.
The industry and consumer advocates agree if something's unclear, demand clarification from the insurance company. For NPR News, I'm Mark Zedeklik in St. Paul.
His story comes to us thanks to a reporting partnership with NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, and Kaiser Health News. You're listening to Morning Edition from NPR News.
It's Morning Edition on WHYY 718. Good morning. One consequence of improved U.S. relations with Cuba is that Cubans believe it will soon be harder to immigrate to the U.S. In a report from Miami, we hear that 2015 has seen the largest influx of Cubans in more than 2 decades. Greg Allen reports at 7:37 on Morning Edition. Good morning. Rain falling in Philly, 49 degrees, 41 degrees in Glenmore. News is coming up next from NPR.
I'm Marty Moskowing. Today, Radio Times, we look back on the year in TV shows, including the changes to late night, and a good year it was. Then we continue our history series with Simon Winchester and his sprawling and fascinating history of the Pacific Ocean. That's Radio Times, today from 10 to 12 on WHYY.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. Iraq's Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi is in Ramadi today, a day after Iraqi forces recaptured the city from ISIS militants backed by U.S. airstrikes. He arrived by helicopter to meet with military and counterterrorism commanders. Islamic State held Ramadi for 7 months after sweeping through the region in May. Beginning today in Britain, psychological abuse is a crime. As Larry Miller reports from London, it's an extension of the domestic abuse law in England and Wales.
The new law is designed to protect partners and family members from coercive and bullying behaviors, including controlling access to social media and bank accounts, and when they're allowed to eat, sleep, or go outdoors. It's also a crime to prevent them from leaving by taking passports or car keys. Those convicted face up to 5 years in prison.
Severe weather, including tornadoes, is blamed for more than 40 deaths across the U.S. over the past week. 11 people died in Texas on Saturday after strong storms and tornadoes moved through the Dallas area. In Amarillo, Orlando Sevilla and Arnold Robledo spent some time helping motorists stranded by snow.
There's people trying to give us money, not for money. We just did it for, like I said, for a little hug. A little hug and a smile, we'll do it.
More than 2,800 airline flights in the U.S. were canceled yesterday because of storms. I'm Dave Mattingly in Washington.
I'm Dan Hilferty, President and CEO of Independence Blue Cross. We're a proud partner in the Healthcare Innovation Collaborative, powered by the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. The collaborative is determined to make life better for people with chronic diseases like diabetes or heart failure. If you have an innovative idea that will help, you can submit your concept at greaterthanhealthcare.com by January 15th. The Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce supports WHYY.
The deadline for the 2015 tax year is December 31st at midnight. Visit whyy.org/support to make your gift now. Thanks very much.
7:21, we get a read on the roads. Here's Melanie.
The rain is causing some problems. Conshohocken Road is closed because of flooding between Diamond Avenue and Ernest Station Road. Waverly Road blocked because of a fallen tree between Lafayette Road and Riverview Road. Jammed on 476 northbound. We had an earlier overturned vehicle. You're jammed from exit 1 McDade to exit 9 Broomall. Southbound, we have an accident cleared. Still jammed between exit 5 and exit 1. 44 in West Deptford closed at Paradise Road because of down pole wires. This report made possible by the Ad Council. For WHYY, I'm Melanie Armstrong.
The forecast today, rain early, then remaining cloudy with showers in the afternoon, a high of 60. Some clouds tonight, a low of 43. 49 in Philadelphia, 44 in Hilltown at 7:22.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Frederica and Howard Stevenson, supporting Olin College, which is working to help the next generation of engineers develop the entrepreneurial skills, experience, and mindset to bring technological innovations to market. Learn more at olin.edu. From the estate of Joan B. Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio and seeks to help NPR produce programming that meets the highest standards of public service in journalism and cultural expression. And from Jane and Gerald Katcher, supporting the children's movement of Florida, dedicated to helping all children enter school with the social, emotional, and intellectual skills needed to succeed. More information is available at childrensmovementflorida.org.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montaigne.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Judges, baseball umpires, and loan officers constantly have to make judgments. Does the person performing qualify for asylum? Is the pitch a ball or a strike? Should I approve this loan application? Since all these people are human, they make mistakes, and our social science correspondent Shankar Vedantam has come across a mistake that all make, and some research about that. Hi, Shankar.
Hi, Steve.
And the mistake is what?
Well, the mistake lies in seeing patterns where none exist. It's actually a common error, Steve. We often want to impose a sense of order on things that are actually random. We see this in casinos all the time. In fact, the phenomenon is called the gambler's fallacy. If you toss a coin up 5 times and it comes down tails 5 times in a row, you have a feeling that the next coin flip has to come down heads.
It must be heads this time. Put all my money on heads.
Exactly.
Sure.
Now, in reality, of course, there's a 50-50 chance the next coin flip is going to be heads. Each coin flip is completely independent, and strings of heads or strings of tails are not surprising, but we're often surprised when they do it.
Okay, so how does that apply to this situation where people are judging balls and strikes or judging human beings in a courtroom?
Well, many analyses of the gambler's fallacy have typically been lab experiments. Kelly Shue at the University of Chicago, along with her colleagues Daniel Chen and Toby Moskowitz, they analyzed 150,000 rulings by judges in immigration courts. So these were judges hearing asylum cases. The researchers analyzed how often does an asylum approval follow a rejection or vice versa. Now, each case, obviously, has no bearing on the next case, so how judges rule on one case should not affect how they rule on the next case. Here's Kelly Shue.
What we find is that judges tend to deny asylum if they granted asylum to the previous case, and the opposite. So they tend to grant asylum if they just denied asylum to the previous case.
Whoa, so it's like that person with the coin, flipping it heads or tails. They're thinking on some level, sometimes if I just had tails, the next one maybe ought to come up heads.
That's right. Now, actually, if you ask the judges, they will probably tell you that each case has no bearing on the next, no bearing on the next. But I think the gambler's fallacy often operates outside of people's conscious awareness. So very subtly, it's biasing people into making judgments. The researchers find the same thing in a separate analysis of nearly 1 million pitches in Major League Baseball. Umpires have to call a ball or a strike depending on where the ball crosses home plate. And again, this is especially true with close calls. Umpires don't like to call a series of balls or a series of strikes in a row. Gambler's fallacy at work again.
And this is all very subtle. It happens some of the time.
That's right. It happens very rarely, but because you're magnifying this effect over a large number of cases, the net effect can be potentially very
You could
large.
have games decided or human lives changed in disastrous ways. So what is a solution to this bias then?
Well, as with most biases, Steve, the first step is just to be aware of the bias. But in one experiment that Shu and her colleagues conducted with loan officers in India, they found something that did work. This was a lab experiment where they had loan officers come and study loan applications and assess whether to offer a loan. Now, these were loans that had already been issued, so the researchers knew which ones had turned out well and which ones had turned out badly, so they could assess the accuracy of the loan officers' decisions. Researchers gave the loan officers a financial incentive for each correct decision. Here's Kelly Shu.
We find that when the loan officers are given stronger incentives to be accurate, that the magnitude of the gambler's fallacy significantly decreases.
So the thinking here, Steve, is that the financial incentives causes the officers to slow down, think hard, and make a deliberate judgment rather than make a quick intuitive call.
You're saying when some money is put on the line, we take the brain off autopilot and actually think.
So I don't think you can say this applies in every single case. For example, you can't offer financial incentives to judges deciding asylum cases. But in that case, there might be a slightly different solution. The researchers say that varying the kind of cases that the judges see consecutively could help. If the judges feel that each case is sufficiently different from the next, they might be less prone to gambler's fallacy.
Shaka, thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve.
That's NPR Shaka Vedanta, who joins us regularly to talk about social science research and who explores different ideas about the science of human behavior on his new podcast, Hidden Brain.
And as we mark the end of the year, we've been catching up with our correspondents on some of the biggest stories of 2015. NPR's Elise Hu opened our South Korea bureau earlier this year. One of her biggest stories came just yesterday when Japan announced it's paying more than $8 million in restitution, plus apologizing to the South Korean women who were forced into sex slavery during World War II. Elise caught up with some earlier stories with our colleague David Green.
So the news, let's start with that. This deal between Japan and South Korea about comfort women. Does this surprise you?
It did surprise me. This has been such a painful moment in history, and both sides have sort of dug in their heels until finally this week. Comfort women, that term describes women who were forced to service Japanese soldiers during World War II.
South Korean women and girls.
That's right. And really, one of my huge surprises after moving to South Korea was that history issues just haven't died. There's a sense among Koreans that there wasn't a proper reckoning of the colonization of Korea by Japan, and Japan, on the flip side, had said, we've done a lot of apologizing. That sort of animosity really played out in all sorts of interesting ways. For example, I got a Samsung phone in Tokyo. Samsung obviously is a big Korean company, and if you get a Samsung phone in Tokyo, you do not see the Samsung logo on that phone at all. And part of the reason is because of the mistrust between these two countries and the people of both countries.
Wow, so tension really just plays out in everyday life. You, if I remember, really hit the ground running when you arrived. You had no time to sort of settle in.
That's right. I landed late at night at Incheon Airport, which is the main airport for Seoul, and the next morning, the internet guy was getting me hooked up, and there's news that the U.S. ambassador to Korea, Mark Lippert, had been slashed in the face by a North Korea sympathizer.
I remember that.
My internet was not set up yet, and then my interpreter and assistant, we hadn't met face-to-face yet, and she was sent to a press conference at the police station.